If you've listened to this podcast for any length of time, by this point you've probably run into my episodes talking about modern art, and you've probably heard me say something about how modern art is some of the worst art that has ever been created. In this episode, I'm actually going to be talking about how modern art can actually have some value in it. But I'm not just going to be talking about modern art. I'm just going to be talking about how even if you run into bad art, there can still be value found in that bad art, especially if you are someone creative. Welcome to How to Write Good. I am your host, Daniel Poppie. You can find out more about me at danielpoppie.com. If it is your first time here, How to Write Good is a writing podcast that seeks to find principles and advice that can be applied across a broad range of writing situations. If you've been here before, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button below, and share. Now, if you haven't been living under a rock for the past 10 years or so, you've probably heard of the movie The Room. And if you haven't heard of the movie The Room, it is what you would consider a cult film that is so horrible that people think it's so funny that they think it's good. It is one of those movies that is so bad it has become a good movie in some sense. And it's exploded so much within the culture that James Franco actually made a film called The Disaster Artist that outlines the making of that specific movie. But the point is that it is a bad movie that everyone agrees is bad, and you would have a hard time arguing that movie is good. There are a lot of bad movies out in the world, and some of those movies are hilariously bad, and some of those movies are so bad that you cannot finish them. And it's the same with books. You run into books, and I'm sure there's been a case where you read part of a book and you cannot finish the book. I have to admit that it's happened to me multiple times. And as you get older, your patience for bad books gets shorter and shorter. And the reason that your patience gets shorter and shorter is because you realize that you're not going to be on the earth for very long and your time is actually very limited. But even if you dislike a story, even if you dislike a piece of art, even if you dislike a movie, you hate it so much, I think that we need to look at these pieces of art or these stories in a specific way, even if we do think they're bad. And yes, I realize that I am a very opinionated person when it comes to art. I realize that I've ragged on modern art again and again and again, but this isn't a podcast episode that talks about how modern art is the best thing in the world. This episode is actually about looking at bad art and finding the value in that bad art and why there actually is value in that piece of art. So let's switch gears a little bit to get a different perspective, or to start to shift ourselves into a different perspective. Have you ever met somebody that you just didn't like? Or have you met somebody who made you dislike them, right? Everybody has someone like this. I can think of a few off the top of my head. There's not too many people I actually dislike, but there are some people I just do not like for various reasons. Most of the time I do have a reason for disliking them, but there are some people who just rub me the wrong way or who have done things who have tested my patience too much to the point where I just dislike them, okay? Now, what happens when you dislike someone is, for whatever reason, that person, whatever they do, becomes something you hate. If that person likes a particular band, suddenly you start to hate that band. If that person dresses in a particular way, suddenly you start to hate the way people like that dress. And the list goes on and on and on. I actually brought up a few baby names to my wife when we were having our child, and she said no to those names because of the fact that she had known someone that I don't think she disliked that person, but that person had ruined the name for her. And this happens for pretty much everyone. And if it doesn't happen for you, you're not a normal person. So you could probably just shut off this podcast episode. We all dislike someone, and because of our dislike for someone, we suddenly dislike every single thing that person does. And it's a stupid way of thinking, but we all do that in some sense, right? So if I dislike some dude I work with, I might see that guy outside of work, and then I suddenly see, oh, he's drinking a specific type of drink. Oh, that's so stupid. Oh, look at how he's dressing. That's idiotic. Look at how his hair is. Look at how he's talking. Look at what he's talking about. Everything is bad. Now, it isn't true, and everybody knows this unless you're 12 years old. It isn't true that if we hate somebody or we dislike them very much, that everything they do is bad or everything they like is bad. The people I have in my mind right now that I dislike probably enjoy hot dogs. I really enjoy hot dogs as well. So there's at least one thing that we both like. And the view that I have of that person hasn't tainted my view of hot dogs. I don't care what they're made of. I still like them. So what about the art you dislike? I like bad, cheesy movies, okay? And I don't like bad, cheesy movies because they are extremely polished, because part of the cheese of a movie is the fact that the props are bad or the acting's bad or some setting is bad, whatever it is. I don't like bad, cheesy movies because they are good, because they're bad and they're cheesy. But they pique my interest in a way. Something about them makes me want to watch them. Something about them makes me want to see what happens. Something of value is within that movie, even if it is a bad movie. Now, I would love movies and TV shows and books that are phenomenal, that draw me in, that make me cry because they're written so well and not because they're so poignant, but because I can never attain that level of writing. But at the same time, these bad movies, bad books, bad whatever, in a lot of cases are very raw. And that is one of the reasons why people enjoy them, because people realize that the person who is trying to make the art, whatever it is trying to put out an idea that they're incapable of putting out. In another way of saying it, they're too big for their britches, right? Or another way of putting it is saying that they have an idea that is greater than their capacity. And I think that's just great, because if you try to reach for something really high, you're going to probably attain something, even if you can't do it perfectly. So let's shift this over to art. So I think a lot, if not most, of modern art is bad. And some of it is literal garbage, if you look at it. It's true. And I am tired of what has been put on a pedestal in the art galleries. I think a lot of it, not all again, I think a lot of it is not something we should elevate because it is not the highest achievement of humankind. And yes, I do think we should elevate the highest achievements of mankind because it points us toward the best part of humanity instead of the worst. And art is very interesting because art can actually show the bad parts of humanity while doing it in a way that is the best part of humanity. So it's very odd that we can actually do that, but that's another discussion for another time. But some people do like bad art. Some people do like country music. I know I just lost some fans there. I don't care. Some people like the avant-garde. And I think it is beyond my knowledge whether that person actually enjoys that specific piece of art or whether that person has tricked themselves into enjoying that specific piece of art. I think there are cases when the cultural milieu pushes people to like art that isn't actually good. But I think there are cases, and I think there are many cases when somebody is connected to the artistic world and they do find value in a specific piece of art that I look at and I view as trash. I don't say that is art, or I don't say that is good art. Let's rephrase that. But at the same time, I know they found value in it. And that shows me I should reconsider that art to see if there is value in that art. I need to open up my mind and I need to take in that art as a whole and see whether that value that person expresses is actually valid or not. There's a lot of value in things you don't like. right? I don't particularly like broccoli. Broccoli has specific things in it that are good for me. Whenever I exercise, I put it off because it can be painful or it can make me break into a sweat, and that's not as fun as well. I'm not a fan of getting up in the morning, but I know that getting up in the morning produces a more productive day. There are a lot of things that I do not like that have a lot of value in them. And there are even specific artistic works I can name that have value in them, even though I did not like the piece of art at all. The first book in the Artemis Fowl series is one of those. I realize it's a children's book. I realize it's going to be written differently if it is a children's book. I recently tried to read the first book just to see what it was about, and I could not get through the book. It wasn't because the author was a bad writer, but it was because of how the author wrote the book. Despite that, at the beginning of the book, the main character, if you want to call him that, Artemis Fowl, meets a fairy who has lost its power. And I thought that was a very compelling scene. And I thought there was artistic value in the way that scene was presented and set up. And specifically, the picture that it put in your mind of this fairy who is hidden in a dark place who has lost its magic. The goal of pointing out this idea that even art you dislike probably has some value within it is to get us to look at the world not in a negative way or not in a snobbish way. I know I'm being a hypocrite, but rather look at the world as realistic. We're not trying to be unopinionated about things. We're trying to see the world as it actually is. And a person who has created a specific artistic piece has created that specific artistic piece for a very specific reason. And they are trying to reflect something in their world, and it's almost certainly the case that there is value in that artistic piece if they are creating it in earnest, if that makes sense to you. They are not trying to create it just to hoodwink you. They are not trying to create it just to make money. If they are actually trying to create it in earnest, or another way of saying that, they are trying to create it because they are trying to express something out of their own experiences, then I think you're going to find something valuable in that artistic piece. Just as there are positives to people you dislike, there are going to be positives to that artistic piece, and I just don't want you, and I don't want me as well, missing out on those good things that we could add to our ideas or add to how we view the world just because we are turned off by a specific piece of art. That doesn't mean the art is good, and I'm just going to leave it there because I still think that's the case. So what do you think? Is there value in bad art? Is there bad art? Or am I way off? And you should tell me why down below in the comments if you are on some video platform, or you can connect to me through one of my social media platforms as well. If you enjoyed this, you're probably wondering how you can support me. Well, you can actually do two simple things. Follow the first link below to grab a copy of my book, and then follow the second link and sign up for my newsletter. It's that simple. Those two things will mean the world to me and give me more time to write books and create content for you. As always, my name is Daniel Poppie, and this is How to Write Good.